right now? What's kind of going through your head?
It's very stressful, but I hope they will be found, and I hope we can move forward from this.
If you don't want to be with someone anymore, you can just break up. That's literally an option. You don't have to lie, you don't have to manipulate, and you sure as hell don't have to end their lives over it. Not every relationship is meant to work out. Sometimes people just aren't a good fit. I know it's a bitter truth, but that's just how life works. But some people, they don't think like that. They don't see humans. They see problems to erase. This guy saw what Chris Watts did and basically said, yeah, let me go ahead and copy-paste that. Only this time, it happened in Canada. A young mom and her baby girl gone, all because a man couldn't handle the idea of her walking away from his life. Welcome to Grim Reality. Today, we're taking a look at the heartbreaking case of Jasmine Lovett and her 22-month-old daughter, Aaliyah Sanderson, a story of trust, betrayal, and a man who chose murder over maturity. Jasmine Lovett thought she had found someone to build a future with, someone to love her, support her, be a father figure to her little girl, Aaliyah. But what she didn't know was that the man she trusted had already made up his mind. He didn't want a family. He didn't want responsibility. He wanted out. But instead of walking away like a normal person, he planned something darker, something cold, and something permanent. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was premeditated, calculated, carried out like a checklist. One moment, Jasmine was a young mother full of life. The next, she and her daughter were gone without a trace. For 2 long weeks, no one could find them, and the one man who claimed he was helping, who stood beside Jasmine's grieving family, was the same man who tried to bury the truth. Before she became a headline, Jasmine Lovett was just a young woman trying to build a simple, happy life. She was only 23 years old when she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl in 2017. That little girl, whom she named Aaliyah Sanderson, instantly became her whole world. From the moment Aaliyah arrived, Jasmine was absolutely smitten. She didn't just love being a mom, she thrived in it. Jasmine had this soft, natural warmth about her. She was gentle, kind, the kind of person who made others feel safe just by being near. Friends described her as sweet and selfless, but also surprisingly funny. She had a calming presence, but could still light up a room with a quiet joke or a kind smile. It wasn't just that she acted like a good person, she was one. Deep down, in her core, she just wanted to be kind to everyone around her. That's who she was. But like many young mothers, Jasmine's journey wasn't without struggle. Aaliyah's father was in the picture when she was born, but even during those early months of excitement, their relationship was rocky. They tried to make it work, but in the end, it just didn't. And by the end of 2017, they had split up. Still, Jasmine stayed focused. Her top priority was her daughter. She didn't jump back into dating right away. She waited. She built stability. And by the time she turned 25, Jasmine finally felt ready to open her heart again. She turned to dating apps, not looking for anything flashy, just hoping to meet someone who understood what came first in her life, Aaliyah. That's when she met Robert Leeming. He was 34, originally from the UK, and living in Calgary. He had been married before and had a son from that relationship, but now he was single, and, on the surface, seemed stable. He worked in the trades, had a house, and made it clear he didn't mind that Jasmine had a child. They met online in September 2018, and things moved quickly. By October, they were officially dating. Not long after, Jasmine and little Aaliyah moved into Robert's home. It seemed like a new beginning, a fresh chapter. And at first, it really did look promising. Robert appeared supportive. He helped with daily routines, he made dinner, he offered to feed Aaliyah, put her to bed, even take her to daycare. He wasn't just acting like a boyfriend, he was acting like a family man. Jasmine felt safe, supported. For the first time in a long time, she believed she might have found someone who cared for both of them. And for a while, things were okay. But what Jasmine didn't know was that Robert's kindness was only skin deep. Behind the small gestures and quiet charm was a man who didn't actually want the life Jasmine was building. He didn't want commitment, he didn't want the responsibility of raising a child who wasn't his, and he certainly didn't want to share his space, his time, his money, or his future. He just didn't say it out loud. Instead, he smiled, played the part, and waited. As their relationship continued, cracks began to show. Robert became cold, distant. Something about him shifted, and Jasmine felt it. She started telling people that things didn't feel right, that Robert was pulling away. But she stayed calm, stayed kind, hoping maybe things would settle. She had no idea she was living with a man who had already made a decision, one that would end 2 innocent lives and leave a family shattered. By early April 2019, something had shifted. Jasmine Lovett was still living in the same home with Robert Leeming, the man she'd been dating on and off for several months. On the surface, everything seemed manageable, but behind closed doors, Jasmine was opening up to the one person she trusted most, her sister, Genevieve. She confided that things weren't going well. The relationship wasn't what she thought it would be. She and Robert had decided to break up, choosing instead to stay friends and live together as roommates. It wasn't ideal, but it felt like the least messy option, for now. But not long after that conversation, Jasmine's story changed. She told Genevieve that she and Robert had patched things up, that they were giving the relationship another shot. And then, almost as an afterthought, she mentioned something else, something unexpected. She was pregnant. A baby with Robert's child. Now, if you knew Jasmine, you knew she loved being a mother. Her daughter, Aaliyah, was her pride and joy. So the idea that she might choose to end a pregnancy, it didn't sound like her. And yet, that's exactly what happened. Somewhere in the middle of getting back together and trying to make it work, Jasmine made the decision to terminate the pregnancy. Whether it was fully her choice or something she was pressured into, we may never know. But the timing was strange. The entire situation felt off. Her sister sensed it too. Genevieve was worried, not just about the pregnancy, but about Robert himself. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. So she made plans to sit down with Jasmine over dinner. No distractions, no sugarcoating, just a real conversation between sisters. They agreed to meet on Friday, April 19th, 2019. But Jasmine never showed up. No call, no text, nothing. And that was not like her. Genevieve's worry kicked into overdrive. She drove straight to Robert's house that night, hoping to find Jasmine there. Maybe she forgot. Maybe she was asleep. Maybe anything. But when she knocked, no answer. The lights were off, the house was quiet, and Jasmine was nowhere to be found. She wasn't answering her phone. Texts were left unread. Social media was silent. Genevieve had no choice but to leave and hope for the best. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. 2 days passed, still nothing. This time, their mother, Kim, took action. She went to the house herself, knocked on the door, and waited. No one answered, so she left a handwritten note taped to the front door. It was short, desperate. "Where are you? Please call us." By April 23rd, 4 days had passed with zero communication from Jasmine. She had missed yet another family dinner, and the silence was becoming unbearable. This wasn't just Jasmine being distant. This was Jasmine gone. And her family, who knew her better than anyone, could feel it in their bones. Something terrible had happened. By April 23rd, it had been 4 days since Jasmine Lovett last spoke to anyone. 4 days without a single text, no calls, no updates, nothing. She had missed 2 family dinners, something completely out of character, and wasn't returning anyone's messages. Her phone rang and rang, texts went unread, her social media hadn't been touched, and worst of all, her daughter, Aaliyah, wasn't seen or heard from either. At this point, her family couldn't deny it anymore. Something was wrong. And that's when Genevieve, Jasmine's sister, did what needed to be done. She walked into a Calgary police station and reported both Jasmine and her 22-month-old daughter missing. She didn't hold anything back. She told investigators everything she knew, how Jasmine had been in a rocky relationship with Robert Leeming, how they had broken up but agreed to keep living together as roommates, how they had recently gotten back together, and even that Jasmine had become pregnant with Robert's child, but that the pregnancy was terminated. It wasn't a simple story, but it was an important one. Because Genevieve knew this wasn't just a disappearance. Something had happened behind closed doors, and now both her sister and niece were gone. Thankfully, the police didn't waste time. They began building a timeline right away, starting with the last known communications. When was the last time anyone had seen or heard from Jasmine? Who was the last person to physically be with her and Aaliyah? That brought them back to Tuesday, April 16th, the same day Jasmine had planned to prepare for Easter. That morning, Robert had dropped Aaliyah off at daycare. Later that afternoon, he picked her up too. This raised questions. Aaliyah had never been picked up by Robert before, not without Jasmine informing the daycare first. But that day, Jasmine had called in and gave permission for Robert to take her daughter home. So, at the very least, the daycare staff had spoken to her on the phone. That was the last confirmed time anyone heard Jasmine's voice. After that, silence. With this new information, police realized something critical. Robert Leeming was likely the last person to see both Jasmine and her daughter alive. They lived in the same house. He had access to her schedule, and now she was missing. It was enough for investigators to act. Within hours, officers arrived at Robert's home to question him. They didn't storm in with sirens or handcuffs. They knocked on the door and calmly asked to speak with him. At this point, he wasn't under arrest, but they needed answers, and fast. Because Jasmine and Aaliyah were gone, and the man who might have known where they were was standing behind that door. When officers arrived at Robert Leeming's home, something felt off immediately. The front door had a narrow window, but instead of welcoming daylight or a view inside, the glass was completely covered in plastic. Not just taped or shaded, but sealed off in a way that made it impossible to see through. It was strange, suspicious, almost like someone was hiding something. They knocked, and waited, and knocked again. They walked around the property, circled back, knocked some more. Minutes turned into hours. It got to the point where officers were seriously considering leaving, assuming no one was home. But then, a light flicked on inside. And just like that, Robert appeared at the door. He acted casual, calm, maybe too calm. He opened the door and invited them in as if everything was normal.
What do you mean?
Well, that's the reason that we're here,
Why do you think we're here?
is that the family's calling us saying we haven't heard from our daughter and our sister.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay, that makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay, why does that make sense?
But the minute he started talking, red flags began to stack up. The first question was simple. Do you know where Jasmine is? Robert didn't miss a beat. He said she was with her sister. Lie number one, right off the bat. The officers looked at each other. That didn't make sense because Jasmine's sister was the one who had just reported her missing. They told Robert that. His response? Oh, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense? What kind of response is that when someone you supposedly care about has vanished? When officers pressed further, Robert shifted gears. He now said he hadn't heard from her either. He played dumb, like he had just remembered that he also hadn't seen her in a while. A convenient lapse in memory, right? Then came the topic of their relationship. Robert claimed they were no longer together, that Jasmine was more of a roommate than a partner. He said the breakup was mutual, that they had both agreed to live together to co-parent Aaliyah. According to him, Jasmine was totally fine with him dating someone new. And oh, by the way, he was seeing someone new. He told police that on April 17th, just days before Jasmine and Aaliyah were reported missing, he had taken them on a picnic to Bragg Creek, a scenic area about 30 minutes away. He said they all came home after that, and then he left for a date with his new girlfriend. By the time he got back, he claimed they were gone. No note, no text, no call, nothing. And apparently, he didn't find that strange. He just carried on with life. No panic, no questions, no checking in. And that's what bothered investigators the most, his complete lack of urgency. No concern for a woman he had once called his girlfriend. No worry for a child he had supposedly helped raise. Instead of trying to help, he seemed more focused on clearing his own name. And it wasn't just his attitude, it was the holes in his story. Detectives couldn't verify any of the details about that picnic. There were no photos, no witnesses, no evidence to prove it even happened. And more importantly, Jasmine's digital footprint stopped cold after April 18th. She stopped texting, stopped using her bank card. Nothing. It was like she vanished off the face of the earth. So while Robert tried to act helpful, detectives were already drawing their own conclusions. Something was seriously wrong. A few days after that initial conversation, police arrested Robert on suspicion of being involved in Jasmine and Aaliyah's disappearance. It wasn't a formal murder charge. They didn't have enough evidence yet. But they knew he wasn't telling the full story, and they needed to act before he could do something rash. They seized his phone, his car, and they went back to his home with a warrant to conduct a full search. That's when things got even more bizarre. Inside the garage, they found personal items belonging to Jasmine and Aaliyah, stuff that should have been with them if they had left voluntarily. Baby items, clothing, Jasmine's passport, shredded. Why would you shred someone's passport unless you didn't want them traveling or being found? Then there was the kitchen. Detectives found raw pieces of bacon in odd places, like randomly scattered. It didn't make sense. It was just strange. And in the corner of the garage, 5 giant dumpsters. Not 1, not 2, 5. Who needs that many? That alone set off alarm bells. All signs pointed to someone trying to clean up a mess, someone trying to erase people from a space they once occupied. And if that wasn't enough, Robert's cell phone data told its own story. Investigators found that in the days after Jasmine and Aaliyah disappeared, Robert had traveled to a remote, wooded area outside Calgary. It wasn't a casual drive or a common route. It was off the grid, private, the kind of place someone might go if they didn't want to be seen. Despite all this, they had to let him go, for now. They didn't have the bodies, they didn't have a confession, but what they did have was a gut feeling, and it was screaming. Robert wasn't just involved, he was responsible.
How do you feel about this whole thing? I mean,
Terrible. Of course.
His behavior was off. His stories didn't add up. His house felt like a crime scene pretending to be clean. And the more they dug, the more the masks started to slip. Behind the polite tone, behind the helpful act, was a man who was terrified of getting caught. And soon, he wouldn't be able to hide behind lies any longer. By the time April rolled into May, the police were done playing along with Robert Leeming's stories. They had searched his home and his phone. They'd listened to his lies about Jasmine being with her sister, about how they were just roommates, about the picnic and the casual breakup. None of it held water. His calm, indifferent behavior only raised more red flags. His lies weren't just inconsistent, they were cold, emotionless, almost rehearsed. But despite all their suspicions, investigators still didn't have a body. And in the eyes of the law, a murder case without a body is like a puzzle with its center missing. So they decided to take a bold risk. They set in motion something called a Mr. Big operation, a controversial but legal undercover tactic that's only used in Canada. It's not your average sting, it's psychological warfare. The plan? Create an entire fake world around Robert, one where he could let his guard down. An undercover officer approached him, pretending to be part of a powerful criminal organization. But not just any group. This was pitched to Robert as a brotherhood, a tight-knit crew that handled things off the record. They promised him something Robert desperately needed: protection, secrecy, and the chance to make things disappear permanently. But there was one catch. They told Robert, "If you want our help, you have to tell us the truth. All of it. No lies, no games, just honesty." And Robert took the bait. Over the course of several days, these fake criminals built a relationship with him. They shared fake secrets, told fake stories, painted themselves as dangerous but loyal. And Robert, caught in his own ego and arrogance, began to trust them. Bit by bit, his wall came down. He started with hints, little comments about problems he had to deal with. He bragged, smirked, dropped subtle, chilling details. And then, just as investigators had hoped, he confessed. He told them Jasmine had become a problem. She wanted more from him, emotionally and romantically, but he didn't want to give it. He was already cheating on her. He didn't love her. And when she wouldn't just leave quietly, he decided to silence her. In his own words, Robert admitted to ending Jasmine's life in the basement of their home. He said he struck her in the head, not once, multiple times. A brutal act of violence while her daughter, Aaliyah, barely 22 months old, was still in the house. And that's when the horror escalated. Because after killing Jasmine, he turned on Aaliyah too. She was a baby, helpless, innocent. But in Robert's mind, she was a witness. And that was enough for him to justify what he did next. He admitted to murdering her, delivering blunt force trauma, and causing spinal injuries. But the confession didn't stop there. Robert described how he Googled secluded areas near me and chose a location called Bragg Creek, about 30 minutes outside Calgary. He told the undercover officers how he wrapped the bodies, loaded them into his car, and drove out to the woods. He poured gasoline over them, covered the site in mulch, bushes, branches, anything to mask the scene. And in a bizarre twist, he even explained the raw bacon scattered around his home. Why bacon? He believed the scent of rotting meat would throw off cadaver dogs. That's how calculated this man was. Every step, every detail, planned with disturbing precision. Then came the moment that sealed his fate. Robert agreed to show the fake criminal group the burial site. He led them deep into Bragg Creek, down an isolated dirt trail. And there, surrounded by wilderness and silence, he pointed to a shallow grave beneath layers of mulch and debris. It was over. The undercover officers had everything they needed. The very next day, police moved in on Bragg Creek. They brought in forensics, crime scene techs, and canine units. They cleared the area and began the heartbreaking process of recovering the bodies. And just as Robert had described, they found Jasmine Lovett and Aaliyah Sanderson. Their remains were confirmed through dental records and other forensic testing. Both had suffered blunt force trauma to the head. Jasmine's autopsy revealed additional injuries consistent with being struck with a blunt object, possibly a hammer or similar weapon. Aaliyah, heartbreakingly, had suffered not only a blow to the head, but a spinal injury. The scene was devastating, the truth even more so. Robert Leeming had pretended for weeks that he didn't know what happened, that he was innocent, that he had no clue where Jasmine and her baby had gone. But in reality, he was the one who took them there. By May 2019, Robert was finally arrested and charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. The man who tried to outsmart detectives was undone by his own arrogance. And now, the whole world knew exactly what he was capable of.
Robert Leeming walked into court in October of 2021, not as the man he once pretended to be, but as the accused killer of Jasmine Lovett and her 22-month-old daughter, Aaliyah Sanderson. It had been more than 2 years since their bodies were found buried in the woods of Bragg Creek, and now the truth was finally going to be confronted in a courtroom filled with broken hearts and waiting eyes. Right away, Robert stunned many by pleading guilty to killing Jasmine, but not to killing little Aaliyah. He claimed he had nothing to do with her death. According to his defense, the day it all happened, April 16, 2019, Robert picked up Aaliyah from daycare and brought her home like usual. He told the court that at some point, Aaliyah fell down the stairs. He said, "I heard a thump and I saw her lying on the ground." But then he claimed she got up and acted normal, that they sat down and watched TV as if nothing had happened. Hours passed. Then, when Jasmine came home later that night, she went upstairs to check on her daughter and found Aaliyah unresponsive. Robert said Jasmine started yelling, accusing him, panicking. He said she asked him, "Did you do something to Aaliyah?" And that's when, in his words, he snapped. He confessed to hitting Jasmine in the head with a hammer. And it didn't end there. He told the court he wanted the screaming, the fear, the chaos to stop. So he went to the garage, grabbed a gun, and ended Jasmine's life right there in their home. Robert then tried to clean everything up. He stuffed Jasmine's body into a plastic bag, used paper towels to wipe away the blood, and rolled both mother and daughter in blankets. The next morning, he loaded them into his car and drove out to Bragg Creek, where he buried them in shallow graves under mulch and brush. But here's the thing, his story didn't line up, not even close. Autopsy reports showed that Aaliyah suffered blunt force trauma to the head and a spinal injury, not the type of injuries caused by a simple fall. Even more horrifying, her autopsy revealed signs of sexual assault, completely blowing Robert's defense apart. And Jasmine? She had multiple injuries to the skull and a gunshot wound to the head. None of it suggested a moment of panic. Everything pointed to premeditation, control, rage. The prosecution made it crystal clear this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a man who lost control in a single heated moment. This was murder, cold, deliberate, and brutal. And what shattered everyone even more was the question no one could answer. Why didn't he just leave? Why not break up? Why ruin so many lives, including his own? Why take Jasmine and Aaliyah's lives instead of just walking away? Robert never gave a real answer, because there wasn't one. He had a new girlfriend. He was done with Jasmine. He just didn't want to deal with the responsibilities that came with her, or her child. And in the most heartless, irreversible way, he made them disappear. In November 2022, Robert Leeming was officially convicted of second-degree murder in the death of Aaliyah, in addition to his guilty plea for killing Jasmine. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 22 years. And while many would say that justice was served, those words will never feel like enough. Not to Jasmine's mother, not to her sister, not to anyone who knew and loved her. Because justice doesn't bring them back. It doesn't make up for the birthdays missed, the laughter lost, or the future that was stolen. In the end, Robert will spend his life behind bars, alone, forgotten, and haunted, hopefully, by what he's done. But Jasmine and Aaliyah, they will be remembered for their light, their love, their bond, and their story. Thank you for spending this time with me today and for honoring Jasmine and Aaliyah by listening to their story. These cases are hard, they're heavy, but they deserve to be told. If you found this story powerful, or if you want to hear more stories like this one, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support means everything. It helps keep their voices heard and their memories alive.